Well, good afternoon, everyone. We've gotten together here before. We were trying to count how many times. It was at least 2 every year, so that's 24. And there were a few years where we did an extra one, so probably 27, 28 times. The news today is, I think, reasonably good as it's been in a long time. The city is doing well. All the statistics, crime and school performance and tourists and number of jobs, all of these things are going in the right direction. And I think the public is enjoying the greatest city in the world at the time when it continues to try to help more people than ever before and continue to make life for everybody in this city and for our children and grandchildren better. Today we're presenting the city's executive budget for fiscal year 2014. That, to remind you, is the 12-month period that begins next July 1. So we have the rest of May, June, and June before this budget will take place, and it has to be negotiated with the City Council. This is our presentation, what we think the budget should be. It's a democracy, and we will negotiate with the City Council, and I'm confident that with the great leadership of Speaker Quinn, we've had the blessing of having her for the last 8 years, or 7.5 years. We will come up with a balanced budget on time that will carry the city forward. This budget, like the one for the current fiscal year and like every budget we've overseen for the past 11 years, will be balanced. Keep in mind, it is by law has to be balanced, but we are balancing it without raising taxes on New Yorkers, both because of short-term increases in city revenue and also, the most importantly, because of a long-term policy of fiscal discipline. And at the outset, let me point out that the city's budget director, Mark Page, has overseen every one of our administration's budget. He and his team have done a fantastic job through some of the most challenging economic times this city or any city has ever seen, including the steep downturn that followed after 9/11 and the worldwide recession that began in 2008. If you think about in the last 12 years, the things that we've had to deal with outside of our city that have impacted us, and really two things that most people would have said would have caused us great dislocation. And in fact, while there certainly was some, the city is very resilient. The people here pull together. We've shown that time and time again. And here we are with a balanced budget. Mark has worked with our commissioners and deputy mayors to make sure that the numbers add up and that we're able to deliver essential services and honor the commitments of this administration. Now, as to this year's budget, let me first turn to the city's revenues. We are running some $1 billion higher than we had forecast in our preliminary budget in January, but it's critical to understand that this increase is somewhat illusionary and certainly won't go on indefinitely. You'll recall that back in January, we did anticipate just such a bump. We said the reason was the high volume of private sector activity that took place in the last weeks of 2012, prompted by concerns about Washington's run-up to the fiscal cliff and what that could mean for the economy in 2013. And that has front-loaded almost $650 million of revenues into the current fiscal year in 2013. As a result of this spin-up in tax collections, however, we have to lower our forecast for 2014 by roughly the same amount because it's really just revenue that what people did is they sold their business, house, whatever, at the end of 2012 rather than the beginning of 2013 because the taxes, the capital gains taxes they thought were going to be, in fact, were lower. That gives us revenue. There's transfer taxes and capital gains taxes that we then would benefit from in 13. But once sold, you're not going to have that sale in 2013 for the next year. So it sounds good, but it really is more a bookkeeping error or a change, is I think a fair ways to phrase it. We're doing this. We lowered our tax revenues for fiscal 14 because of that, and we're doing that even though we now expect that the number of private sector jobs in our city, which did hit a high last year, will continue to climb and, in fact, grow more rapidly than we forecast the world in January. But there's another factor that's putting a brake on our revenue forecast for 14, and that is our ability to delay continued delay thanks to the court challenges of our ability to sell new taxi medallions. So to offset the extra revenue, which is illusionary, we are also anticipating $300 million less in next year's budget for medallion sales than we once expected. But once again, we still think that will come through, so it's really now in an out-year budget. It's been moved forward. Both of those things I think you really can think of as timing or bookkeeping changes. They really don't change long-term what's going to happen to this city. On the other hand, we have taken in about $200 million more, and this is real dollars, than we had targeted this year as a result of corporate tax audits, and this is part of our Finance Department's new data-driven audit selection process. Those are real. Those are things that we would not have otherwise gotten. Then the expense side of the budget. And we'll go through the slides in a few minutes that show the effects of our administration's longstanding policy of fiscal discipline. That includes $6.5 billion in repetitive savings in the fiscal year 2014's budget that are the cumulative result of 12 rounds of budget actions which we directed city agencies to take since June of 2008. And if you remember, we started a new one of these PEGS program to eliminate the debt of the gap of 2% for the last 6 months of last year and 4% for this fiscal year. And we are on budget to achieve those savings. You will also see that with the notable exception of our public schools, which are our top budget priority, we've kept the growth rate of all other controllable city funding expenses at the rate of inflation for the period from our first budget in fiscal 02 right through the budget that we're presenting today. Of the $23.4 billion total growth in city funding expenses since fiscal year 02, 57% of that rise has resulted from increases in the non-controllable expenses of pensions and fringe benefits. And that is something that is voted by Albany. We have to pay for it. Debt service is one of those things where you can argue that it's controllable, you can argue it's not controllable, but we have to make the long-term investments, and those are things that we will pay for over a long period of time, but also get use of the facilities that we buy with capital dollars over a long term. Increases approved in Albany for the pension system, however, are things that we just cannot continue to afford, and I will show you the numbers when we get there. For all the savings, they are just being eaten up faster than we can save money by these out-of-control costs. Another roughly 9% of our increase in expenses resulted from the higher debt service charges, but we have to build more classroom seats. We have to build a new water tunnel. We have to fix a water tunnel that's falling apart. We need more sanitation trucks to plow and to pick up. The police department cars wear out with time, and there are capital things that we just have to do. Our non-controllable and debt service increases combined accounted for nearly 2/3 of the increase in city-funded expenses since 02. And the non-controllable city-funded expenses will go up 7.6 in the new budget, largely as a result of a jump in employee fringe benefits. So those things that we really can control, we have kept constant, and you'll see that in the numbers, but the out-of-control stuff is really nothing we can do about it. People that say we should go fire half our employees or we should demand savings from them, it would be great if we could get some savings, and we're always willing to negotiate. And in fact, we've started a process to reduce our health care costs and that sort of thing. But it's a long-term thing, and it has to be done with an agreement with the unions. And a lot of that is going to be left to our successor in the same sense it was left to us. We're always trying to negotiate savings, but there is the pressure from the public to keep our workforce intact, and I understand that, and I'm sympathetic to that. It also means that you don't have the kind of leverage you might want to have in terms of negotiating some of these things. On the subject of education, let me point out that the city support for our schools has grown, even though state support has declined. In fiscal year 02, the city and state shared the non-federal cost of education almost 50-50. We paid only $200 million more than the state. That was back in 02. This year, the state's share, you could say it's fallen, but they have deliberately reduced it down to 39%, and so our share had to go up from 50 to 61%, We are now spending $4.7 billion more per year than the state is spending on our education. And this year, as you know, we also lost $250 million in state education aid because the UFT sabotaged attempts to negotiate new teacher evaluation systems. Now, thankfully, the legislature and the governor have assured this will be a only one-time loss, not a loss in perpetuity against our students. But nevertheless, that's another $250 million that either the taxpayer is going to have to reach in their pocket to come up with, or we're not going to be able to use for other things. Let me also point out, however, that while we lost $250 million for being honest, other school districts around the state received no cut in education aid, despite the transparent feebleness of evaluation attempts many of them reached. In effect, I think it's very fair to say they've been rewarded for committing fraud. They literally said they had agreements and then had secret sign letters that said, we're not going to do it, don't worry about it, while our kids have been penalized for us being honest. And why anybody thinks that's fair, I don't know, but the place to go is I guess up to Albany. This is monies that we should have gotten our fair share. We are the major income generator for the state, and yet every year we seem to suffer more than the rest of the state and get cut back dramatically. Before going to the slides, let me just make two final points. The first concerns our continued recovery from Hurricane Sandy, which struck our city 6 months ago this week. Our presentation will show that we sustained an estimated $4.52 billion in costs related to Sandy, and also that we anticipate federal funding to cover all of those costs. So the economic effect on the city, not the pain and suffering, but the economic effect, the feds will pay, will pick up the tab for that. And in terms of reducing our business activity, you know, there are people that got jobs, more overtime. Some stores sell housing goods, fix your house up and that sort of thing. That's not to say we aren't terribly sympathetic to those that were hurt, and we've got to make sure we continue to do everything we can to help the victims of Hurricane Sandy. But in the context of the budget, it is not something that really hurt our budget. The second concerns our responsibilities towards the next administration and towards the people of New York going forward. We will be turning over a balanced budget to the next mayor. We're already starting to address the first budget he or she will have to prepare, the one for fiscal 2015, by rolling $142 million forward into that year, which begins 14 months from now. And because we project there will be a $2.2 billion gap in that budget this coming November, we will propose a gap closing program, as has been our practice every year since we came into office. And hopefully the next administration will just have to say implement it. But the work will be all done for them. Let me remind you that every year we start out this time with a deficit down the road because we just don't know what expenses we can control and what our revenues are going to be. And as we get closer, every year we balance it. But we don't want the next administration to have any more difficulty in doing that than reality necessitates. And we'll do everything we can to prepare so that they'll have less pain, and we'll all be the beneficiaries of that. And today we're also calling attention to long-term budgetary challenges that the next mayor will have to face. As I point out, the cost of pensions and fringe benefits are continuing to rise. And in fact, we're spending nearly $230 million more than we had anticipated in January to meet additional pension costs this year and next. So one of the changes from the January budget till now is just another $230 million that Albany has piled on us, and we've got to come up with the money. More also needs to be done. Specifically, city employees must be contributing to the costs of their health insurance. The governor did a very good job in Albany, and he negotiated with the union so that state workers now pay a part of their health care costs, and in the private sector, virtually all private sector people pay a share of their costs. It is only the New York City employees, where only a very tiny percentage of them pay something, and most do not. And that's why the city is preparing a proposal for updating health benefit contracts. Although what we can do is we can gather information and get responses to our requests for proposals. It will probably, because of timing, fall on the next administration. To do that, you would have to convince the unions to go along, and we've been for a dozen years talking about this, but have not been able to get it done. What we want to do is ensure a higher standard of care for our city workers, but also protect the budgetary health of city government itself. So let me go to the slides. And These things I tried to outline for you already. Balanced budget, plan for balancing next year. Local economy continues to recover. We have more people working today in New York City than ever before in history. Our unemployment rate's a little higher, but it's different than the national unemployment rate. If you look at the numbers, it is because our workforce is growing, not our workforce declining, which is what happens in the rest of the country. Around this country, people are saying, I'm not going to get a job. Therefore, when they get a phone call asking, are you looking for a job, they say no. That does cut the unemployment rate, but it doesn't solve the problem. In our case, you see a lot more people coming here looking for jobs, or people wanting to have a second income in their family, and they're going out thinking that the economy in New York is good enough so that they can find that. Our forecast, I said, the taxi medallions, we still think we're going to get it, but I think we have to be realistic, and with court challenges and the delays, we just have to move the revenue a little bit further out. City agencies, I've talked about the increase, we'll see it in the charts, increase in pension funds. We have been benefiting from some lower than expected energy costs. Got to keep doing that. And the bottom line is that combining these reserves with set-asides with no longer necessary, and that'll help us balance our budget. And city-funded controllable expenses, that's city-funded, remember, are roughly constant, and our non-controllable and debt service are going up. That's 7.5% I talked about. You can see why all of this is happening. The job growth is going to slow down, we think. Fiscal tightening, sequestering a variety of federal things probably is going to hurt, excuse me, jobs. This is throughout the country. But so you can see the private employment. GDP is in 14. At the moment scheduled, most economists think it'll go up, but you're still only talking about going up from 1.5% to 2.5%. And that's not really a big enough increase in GDP to really have an impact on the jobs market. Housing starts are forecast to be a little bit better. They do seem to have bottomed in many places. This is for the U.S., but in New York, housing prices have stabilized and seem to be improving a touch. I wouldn't overstate that. And if you're trying to sell your house, you'd say not at all. But they certainly have stopped going down. The stock market, as you know, has had a pretty good year, up something like 13% this year, or in the last year. And with lower volatility, some people would say it's due for a correction. Others want. We can't sit here and gamble on the stock market. It'll have an impact on our pension funds, and on people's willingness to spend money and ability to spend money. But it's done pretty well, and common sense says it can't go on forever. Member firm profits, which are dependent to some extent on the stock market, we're forecasting to be half of what it is this year. And you can see how great it was back when. But $13 billion is something like it used to be, and down from what it was last year. And we are dependent on this industry. Not only we've diversified our industry. If you go back to, we used to make a joke out of it, our 5-borough economic diversification plan, but thank God we did that, because we would be in real trouble if we were just dependent on this industry. New York private employment, the orange line, the difference between that and the dotted line is the government went back and the State Department of Labor revised the numbers back here, and so that has to do with what we think is going to happen. And that's normal. A lot of these time series get revised later on retrospectively. What's happened to us is some of these categories have been growing leaps and bounds: professional service, hospitality, retail, education. But here's where the financial services have been declining. Dodd-Frank is not good for our city. All these banks are cutting back their employees, and a lot of the ways they made money on which we tax them and paid for our police, fire, education have gone away. So this is really bad news for us. This is somewhat good news, but you can see leisure and hospitality average salary is 35, or compensation here it's 10 times that. So a small amount here adds up to a very big amount over here. Professional services is a very broad category, and there are plenty of people that only make 35, and there are people that probably make 200, and it sort of averages out to 100. But you can see which industries are doing better and which are not, and this is, as I said before, we still are dependent on that industry. Vacancy rate, the asking rents go up, and we want this rate to go down. The forecasts are that it will. Commercial construction in the city is actually doing pretty well, and commercial buildings are becoming more valuable, and that's why our tax revenues have been going up. It's not because of residential, it's because of this. But we still need to finish get some tenants for the World Trade Center, the main tower, Building 4. We need some for Building 3 to be completed. Need tenants for the West Side. And there's lots of good deals in the works, but they've got to be signed before we really get any benefit out of it. Nevertheless, I am optimistic that a lot of people are looking for space in the city, and there's not a lot of space that has been built recently. So I still think the West Side and the World Trade Center and Long Island City will be the Gold Coast for a while, and then we have to make sure we rezone the eastern part of North Manhattan because those are the buildings that we'll have to do over the next 20 years, half a dozen buildings over 20 years. It's not a lot of construction, but you have to keep revitalizing your central city or the city just slowly wilts away. This is the tourism numbers. Remember, we had 52 million visitors. When you talk to the Port Authority about how many people are landing at Kennedy and LaGuardia and that sort of thing, these numbers still look to us like they're going to continue to go up. And that's NYC and Company. That's Ray Kelly bringing down crime. That's Dennis Walcott improving the schools, or Veronica White making the parks better, or Kate Levin with culturals. All these things add together, and that's why people come here. And if we go back to here, you can see the number of jobs being created in leisure and hospitality. That's directly tied to the number of tourists that come here. Residential building permits, look at that. That's an amazing drop. That was the mortgage crisis. It is starting to come up. Let's hope it continues. But it will only continue if we keep the city safe and clean and exciting and try new things. So we've got to you can't let the naysayers stop everything, and you can't walk away from our responsibilities to make the investments, which in a few years will pay dividends. Let's go to the budget. No surprise, but our expenses and our revenues basically follow each other. We have to be balanced at the end of the year. This shows that our expenses will be slightly greater than our revenue, and you can see the numbers down here. Keep in mind, at this point, this is a forecast for the future. It's always that way. If we went back to here, we would have seen, or here, any one of these places. At this time, for the out years, you know your expenses, you just don't know your revenues quite yet. And then we have to do some things, these programs to eliminate the gap, to reduce those expenses and bring these two back in line. And if you see down here, this is 2014, we actually have a little bit of a surplus to roll into 2015. Now, my hope is that that will grow, but we are trying to prepare for 2015, which will, in all fairness, be the next mayor's responsibility, because 2014 will end only 6 months into the next mayor's term. But you can see percentages going here. And revenues, you'll notice in 2014, you see the decline. It's here. It's, the 6%, 5%, and it goes down to 0.6%, and then comes back up. That is because of the prepayment or pre-selling the spin-up in many cases. These are the gaps closing programs I talked about. And you can see, if you go back, some of these that were done years and years ago still have benefits. This is not one-time cuts. We try to focus on repetitive things. And so last year we had $6.3 billion in less expenses than we would have had. Here's $6.5 billion, less expensive. You can't spend this money because it's getting eaten up by other things, but God help us, if we didn't do this, we would really be in enormous trouble. Here are the individual programs you can go through. Remember, it was 2% in 2013 and 4% in 2014. And these numbers are pretty close to what we've actually seen so far. Non-controllable expenses, we keep going on again about this. Here are our controllable. They've grown at the rate of inflation. Other than education, part of this is because that's our priority, and part of it is because the state cut back. And these are city funds we're talking about. So if the state cuts back and we want to keep the number of teachers in classrooms, we've got to put more money in, and we've done it. And so if you add these two numbers together, that's about $8 billion right there. If you go over here, non-controllable and debt service, This is, if you add these up, it's 15-odd billion, and it all comes out of the $23 billion in total expenses, which were up this amount. So you can see how it all fits together. The state shares the non-federal cost of education. When they did it, we spent only $200, as I said before. Now we're spending $4.7 billion more than we did before. And I'll show you the total cost is in the $22 billion range for state and city, 15 of which is ours. And if they had continued to share the cost, we would have had $2.1 billion less expense this year. And this, I repeat the same point, that the UFT refused to negotiate, and if you have any questions about that, you only have to look upstate, where they literally committed fraud, in my view, by telling the public, telling the governor, telling the commissioner of the State Department of Education that they had agreements, and they did, except they didn't say that they had signed letters saying, don't worry about it, we won't enforce it. If that isn't corruption that the governor should look at, I don't know what is. We were honest, and the governor cut us $250 million. You go write the story. Let's talk about labor a little bit. There is the issue of the size of our workforce, which we try to keep down as low as possible. We have to provide services. The city's job is to hire people to provide services. That's fundamentally what we do. Virtually all of our expenses, as you'll see at the end, are labor costs. We buy some things. We have some other expenses for electricity and fuel and paper clips. But fundamentally, it is health benefits and pensions and salaries for our employees. They provide the services. This is the way every government works. That's what it should be. But the question is, what's the real cost? And there are people that say, well, you haven't had any new contracts in a long time. It depends on which union that's true, how true that is. But we have something in this city called the Taylor Law. And the Taylor Law, you can think about it as something where it doesn't really matter when a contract expires, because we have to continue to meet our obligations that we had earlier, including any increases that were called for in old contracts. And the labor force has to show up and do the work, and they've been doing that. They have been doing their part. We've been doing our part. But when you look at the costs, you can see just how important these other benefits are. They're fundamentally 72%. 3/4 of your salary it's increased by 3/4 because of these benefits. Now, somebody says, oh, those aren't my benefits. You tried taking them away. I don't think you get very far in that. And you can see the percentage has continued to go up. And this is all Albany. We have not negotiated with the unions for increases, basically, and there's some adjustments, but fundamentally in pensions and other fringe benefits, that's not the city negotiating it. It's the city paying for it. It all comes from Albany. And they go and they say, hey, I'm a good guy, I'll vote for it. We're the bad guys, and we've got to pay for it. I don't begrudge them that. I'm just telling you this is the real world. And when people say they haven't gotten raises, I'm going to show you they have gotten raises. In fact, 72% is an average. Fire department gets 116%, police 104, 88 for sanitation, 84 corrections. Everybody else gets a 60%. That's how you average out to this. But, you know, fire department salary, it's a great job. It's a job where you can save lives and make a difference. It also pays you generous benefits, which you would never get in the private sector. So the question is, if your salary is a little more or a little less than what you could earn in the private sector, that's not the comparison you should do. You have to look at the benefits too. And that's one of the things we have been taking care of our finest, our bravest, our boldest, our strongest, by giving them, when we can, benefits that will let them focus on their job rather than focus on their health and their family's health, and we're trying to make sure that they can continue to do that. The city employees that pay part of their health care is only 5%. State employees, over 90%. Private sector employees, over 90%. So we've got to get the city employees to pay part of it. And there's two reasons for that. One, it defrays your costs a little bit, but most importantly, as you all know, in the private sector, you think twice before you're going for things you don't really need. If you really need it, you go do it. And a de minimis amount of copay has had big effects every place it's been tried on the total expenses. not been a great pain, not with great pain for the employees, but for the employer, it has reduced their costs significantly. We're going to spend $66.3 billion. That's twice what we did in 2002. And we've asked for requests for proposals to try to get a more modern health plan. That is going to be, as I said, have to be negotiated with the unions, and timing says if it can be done, it'll be done after we are gone. But our goal is to work collaboratively with the Municipal Labor Committee and at least get the proposals out by the end of the year so that our successor can get some responses back and they won't have to start the process. The process will be going, and then they've just, the tough stuff is implementing it, I'll grant you, but at least they'll have the information. Now, then there is also this issue, people saying, oh, well, the next mayor is going to have to come up with retroactive pay raises. That's just not possible. Bankrupting the city is overstating it, but taxes would have to rise very dramatically, and I'll show you how much to do that. And in fact, we have been increasing the salaries of our employees for the last few years. When they say they don't have a contract, because we have to honor the contracts in the past through the Taylor Law, and because Albany keeps giving them benefits, on average, all city employees have gotten a 3% raise. And so you can see down here, 3.3, and the teachers union, in fact, they've got a 3.8% raise. Now, they say not this year. They get it in different years, but it all added together. The teachers' compensation has gone up 3.8% every year, and the average employee in the city has gone up 3.3%. If the city were to agree to retroactive raises for teachers, which the union's asking for, and I don't blame the union for asking, but it's just certainly not possible. What we would have to do is we'd have to spend $3.7 billion in 2014 and $1 billion after that. If you did increases for the teachers retroactively, it's kind of hard to believe that you wouldn't have to do it for all city employees, and then the cost would be $7.8 billion next year alone, and then $3 billion every year afterwards. So, it's just... we've been giving raises. They've been going up 3.3 and 3.8% for teachers. On top of that, it's just something the city cannot possibly afford. And incidentally, everybody in the private sector that I know is not getting raises of this order of magnitude at all, very few. All these contracts, you say, well, they expired. What happened really, and why the teachers are upset, is that they gambled that by having a longer contract than the other unions each time, instead of a 2-year contract, they always asked for a 2.5-year contract. What they did is they moved the date of their next negotiation from before the mortgage crisis to after the mortgage crisis. They took a bet, and unfortunately the bet didn't pay out. The city didn't deliberately do anything. We didn't cause the mortgage crisis, but our ability to pay after the mortgage crisis was very different than our ability to pay before the mortgage crisis. The teachers union took a bet. Thank you, Randy Weingarten. She wanted to show that she had delivered more than the other unions. It was just bookkeeping more, but she tried that, and now, unfortunately, our ability to go back and do that just is not there. Anyways, love to pay everybody more, but the bottom takeaway is they all get 3.3%, teachers 3.8% every year when they say they don't have a contract. And you can see that here. In fact, this is just for UFT members. They've gone up in a couple of years 11.5%. Sandy, $4.5 billion expenses, all paid for by the feds. I don't think we have to dwell on it. In the end, it was a little bit of mishigas, but in the end, both the Democrats and Republicans, the House and the Senate, and then the President with Sean Donovan all came through, and they are paying for these expenses. It's not to say that there isn't great pain, not to say that we wouldn't have much preferred not to have Hurricane Sandy, but we also incidentally raised something like $70 million in the Mayor's Fund to advance New York just from private donations to do things that we couldn't do with public monies. A lot of people came together and have really helped. And, we're going to have the bathrooms and the beaches open. Boardwalks are getting done, won't get all done before this year. Most stores we've gotten open, not all, but there's always some more. Most people we've helped got heat, hot water. Kaz Holloway put together a group of contractors from around the country 20,000 housing units were given heat, hot water, heat, hot water, and electricity in 2 months, with FEMA paying for it. As far as we can tell, according to FEMA too, nobody's ever even remotely tried that, much less been able to accomplish something like that. So all the people that worked from the city and from the private sector really did a great job. But once again, it is $4.5 billion fully paid for by the feds. In terms of our capital budget, you can look at the numbers. Every year, the next 2 years out look like they're dramatically different than what they were before. And that's because we plan things, but it takes longer to implement than what you'd like. There's just real delays. And in fact, I just had somebody put in the numbers here so you can see. For 2012, when we looked at this last year, it was up to here. And this is what it looks, the actuality is. So you can expect these things not to not get done, but they will get moved forward. And these are, we just put them so you could see it, they are capital expenditures, but as I said, since the Fed's paying for it, they're not coming out of our pockets. What are they spending the money on? Biggest, $8 billion, far and away, is on new schools. Dennis, if you keep making the schools better, this is going to be a worse problem next year. But it's a nice problem to have. People used to leave the city and didn't want to send their kids to public schools, and today they do. Not everybody. Not every school's perfect. But the bottom line is we have demand for a lot more seats, and that's good. We just have to spend the money to do it. Recycling, resurfacing. Street lanes, we don't do anywhere near as much as we used to. The good news is that the weather in the last couple of years, and I don't know if it's global warming or not, but the bottom line is it's been warmer with a lot less snow. And the real cost of removing snow is not the plowing, not putting the sand down. It's repairing the roads after the plows dig them up. And so we have had better results. Now, if you go pounding over a pothole today, you're going to say, what the hell was he talking about? But the bottom line is there's less chance of you doing that. But we still have to go and resurface a lot of roads. We need a lot more sanitation vehicles that keep getting worn out. There is a bypass to a tunnel, that is a water tunnel that is leaking. We're under obligation from the federal government to fix it. We have to build another tunnel around it. Then we have to deal with the issue that once we plug the leak, the wetlands that are being fueled by that link is going to be hurt, and you can't hurt wetlands, and nobody knows how we'll work that out. We're under obligation to do it from federal law, but if we do it from federal law, we're in violation of federal law. I'll leave it to somebody else. We're fixing the tunnel, and we'll worry about it. Everybody talks about overflow. We found when something like Sandy happens, obviously we can't handle the capacity. We get fined every time there's a big rain. If there's a very big rainstorm, the sewer system can't handle, or the waste treatment plants can't handle it, and everything bypasses and goes into the water, and we pay federal fines. It's the way the sewers were designed 50, 100 years ago, and we are working to change it. It's just going to be a very long-term thing, and you can look at some of these other things. Here we've tried to show you what the plan is and how it changes year to year. Property tax, everybody says, well, it keeps going up. Yes, for residential, however, remember there is a law that says we can only raise your property taxes can only go up, not us raising them, but your property tax can't go up more than X percent every year and Y percent every 5 years. It was done as a smoothing thing. The smoothing problem, unfortunately, is it extends the period. Even though if your property value has gone down, your taxes can still go up. At some point, you get to the other side of that curve when your property values are going up, but your property taxes are going down. Why are these always going up? Commercial buildings, in this case. Very big part of our tax base, and commercial buildings are more valuable because the economy, people coming here, tourism, and that sort of thing. Economically sensitive taxes. Here you can see our taxes we are expecting in 14, $1.1 billion lower than 13. Why? Because that billion was mostly this spin-up, and it's in this number here. So, you'll go back to increased revenues, we think, but next year, it's the combined year, this billion is in both this number and this number. And then there are some other things which go up and down. Non-tax revenue, 8%, Mark, what was that one? There was one, I don't recall which one. There was one thing that put that up dramatically. I'll find out and get it to you. Here you can see by departments how much each department spends and what the increases are projected to be. We've got to keep our city safe and clean, and the budget projections are all very small in terms of our projected increases. Some of the things are things beyond our control, social health and welfare services, although in a lot of these cases it's paid for by federal monies or state monies. But the bottom line is you can see controllable spending, as we said, is basically constant, changes 0.1%. Let's go and take a look at this is the difference between the 13 plan. This was the 13 plan, and here's the 14. This is the one you can see what. Let me see this one. You can see what's changed since the January plan, and they are very small changes. In fact, the tax revenue forecast up here. Remember, we took it out over here. This tax audit, this, I said, David Frankel's got us some money. This is the delay in the medallions. This was a legal settlement, as I remember, to be closed. We are really rolling $1 billion from here into here to balance that. And that's, remember, I said we have money coming from here over to here. When we put it back, it comes out of here and goes over to there. But it's just a bookkeeping thing. And here you can take a look in a different format at all of the different categories. The one that I want to show you is right here where, here. If you take a look, this number is the total budget. This is the budget for the uniformed services. You'll notice that in city funds, it's virtually the same. Go down to education, and you'll notice it's a third less. Why? Because the state is paying a third of our expenses there. Go to health and welfare, social services, it's a third less. And that's because the federal government gives us some money for some of those. So the total budget, the difference is, I can't read the numbers here, $69.7 billion, but it's only $50.2 billion in city expenses. And all of these are on your charts. Be happy to take some questions.